Hey, this is Monique. Welcome to One Mo Project. So I thought I would make a couple little fish with magnets and a fishing pole for my grandson to play fishing with. And so I did make about, 24 before I was finished. Anyway, this video I'm going to show you how I made the ones that I sewed. I crocheted some, and that's a whole different thing for another day. So for now, we're just going to do how I made the ones that I sewed. In another video, I'll show you how I made the fishing hole, and another video, I'll show you how I made the fishing pole. But for now, let's see how I made the fabric fish. I drew up these fish that I thought would be interesting, and I'm going to show you how to make one and then show you the few things I did different. When I cut them out, I added about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance to all of them because I drew them at the finished size. And then for the fins, the side fins and the tail fin, I sewed around the 3 sides and then trimmed my corners and clipped my curves after I added a little bit of batting. That's cotton batting because that's what I had, but that was also because I just wanted a little bit of texture there, a little bit of thickness to these pieces. So I added that cotton batting. And then I used these hemostats, which you can get at a place like, I don't know, Harbor Freight or something, really cheap. But they came in really handy to reach in that little bitty hole, pull that back through, and trim and turn it the right way. They also work well because you can use them to push out the corners without stabbing through the corners. So here I'm doing the side ones, same thing, trimming them and clipping them. But also when you sew them, remember to put right sides together. The outside of the fabric goes to the inside so that when you turn it the right way, the seam goes to the inside and the right side's on the outside. Did you get all that? Anyway, remember right sides together. And then sew the 3 sides, leaving an opening that will be attached to the fish. And then using those handy dandy, what does handy dandy mean anyway? Where'd that come from? Anyway, using those handy dandy hemostats to turn it the right way out. On this fish, I did a little stitch and back stitch to give it that sort of ridge, kind of, I guess, like a bone, I guess it would be in the fins of a fish. I didn't do that on all of them just because they're all kind of different, but on those I did. So then the fins are all ready. Now to sew the head to the body, remember, right sides together. Not as important on this one because the blue is the same color either way, but it is important because you have to make sure that the fish heads fit together after you sew them because they're not mirror image. So you have to make one that's going to be the right side and one that's going to be the left side. So keeping right sides together is still important, even though the solid blue looks the same on both sides. It's not the same shape on both sides. So see, once they face each other, they're the same. Now, because I'm gonna have to leave an opening to turn this fish when he's done, I'm sewing across the bottom of both of the right and the left side to make that easier to turn and keep all that cotton batting straight and all. So that's just gonna be sort of a temporary stitch and then a guide if I choose to do it by hand, just to let you know I didn't. But now to pin it together, I want to make sure that at the top of the fish and the bottom of the fish, where the head changes color to the body of the fish, it's a nice straight line. So that's why I put that pin top and bottom. But now I'm only going to sew around the head of the fish. I'm not going to sew the whole body because I want to be able to put in safety eyes. So I'm only going to sew around his head and just a little bit past the point where it changes to his body, but not all the way around. See right there? That's as far as I sewed. And then trim my corners and clip my curves so that I can turn him right side out and have a look at him and decide where exactly I want to put the safety eyes and put the safety eyes in. So I got these box of safety eyes that I used from Amazon, of course. I don't remember what they were exactly, but these have a blue, a black, and a blue, and then see they have this big back, so they stab all the way through, and you have this big back on so that they can't pull out too easy. Remember, I always say, don't use a bamboo skewer because it's too sharp and it'll stab all the way through. Well, now it's time to use the bamboo skewer so that it will stab all the way through. So once I stab it all the way through, the hole's not quite big enough for these safety eyes, so I used that chopstick that I have there to open that hole up a little bit. and then put this big back on the back of the eye to keep them in there and keep them safe. You don't have to cut off these points, but they made it too long on the inside, so they kind of were trying to stab through the other side a little, so I cut them off. On this fish, I sewed his side fins in the middle of the body, so I put it on facing the wrong way and sewed across it, little back stitch at the edge, and then flipped it over and sewed it again across so that it's pointing the right direction. That way it tucked away all those raw edges without having to go actually through that fish. And I used white thread for all of this. They are toys after all, but I used white thread for all of it. Maybe I could have changed, but for the most part the white just adds a nice contrast, especially there like on that little purpley color. It added some contrast, so I did not change colors to try to match my thread. I just used the white. Alright, so now that I've got all of those fins in place, I'm going to finish sewing around the fish body, but I'm going to leave that opening at the bottom. Remember I did that straight stitch across the bottom at the beginning? I'm going to leave an opening there so that I can turn the fish the right way. So I have to tell you, this one has a little interfacing pouch sort of thing hanging off of it, because on the first fish that I tried to put in there's the hole to turn it. I tried to put in the ceramic magnets to use those for our, fishing. They're not strong enough. They just didn't really do a very good job of being able to make it where you could catch the fish, because they were inside of the fabric and the cotton batting, so they weren't strong enough. So I'll show you toward the end what I did with different ideas to help it. Now see how this has the fin across the top? Since I have that batting on the inside, I can just sew that detail in there and make that, it'll be a little bit stiff standing up to make that fin across the top of, I don't know what kind of fish this is, but whatever kind of fish this is. And then some polyfill batting to fill in the fish. I didn't want to make them too fat, but I did put maybe a little more up in their heads to make them a little stiff. And then I could sew this closed by hand. I'm not feeling it. I think I sewed maybe one of them by hand out of the whole batch of fish, the whole school of fish. But I just sewed them on the machine because they're toys. So I sewed around across the bottom edge, but then again to make that bottom fin, sewed across there. And I tried to push all the polyfill batting up inside of its body a little more and not down there in that fin, but I don't know that it's 100% up there, but it doesn't really matter. So that's the basic way that all of the fish are made. Now see, he's got a nut, and he's got a nut screwed onto his nose. Screwed on? No. Sewn on, which is a little scary because it's for a baby, but anyway, this fish has the fin sewn in at the seam for the head and the body. Now I'll skip pinning things a lot because I can hold it well enough to go straight, but because this seam is curved, I pin it, and I pin it a lot to help hold it on there. I backstitch over that fin because, everything about this could be a handle. This fish, I used this fun iridescent fabric to make the fins on that, but I didn't want to try to sew it and have it so thick, so I burned the edge. Now I do have a fire extinguisher close and a cup of water just off camera, because I've done this before with some fabrics, but this stuff was really flammable. Good thing I'm not making pajamas. This though melted the edge to keep it from raveling, but I have to say that by the time this gets played with a lot, it's probably going to be pretty raveled. These fins are probably not going to hold up very well for a little boy to play with them, but he likes them and they look cute, and if they don't last, so what? This fish has this giant paper clip for the magnet to attach to. So let me show you what I did. That's where I'm going to put the eye, and I want it to stick out. But this can be a little confusing because remember, right sides together. So I have to make it point in. The part that I want to be out has to point in. So I pin all that in. But how am I going to sew across a paper clip? You could sew close to it and then go back and do it by hand. But I just chose to turn the flywheel of the machine by hand. Once I got close, I just turned that by hand, because if I had tried to sew across it, at the very least I would have broken a needle, but I could have hurt my machine. But by just turning it by hand a couple of times when it tried to come down straight on top of it, I was able to maneuver it just a little, slide it forward or backwards or something, so that it would step over it instead of trying to just stab straight through it. Some machines are tough, and it would have tried to stab straight through it. So, and then I did a second stitch because everything about a toy for a kid could be a handle, so I wanted to reinforce that a little. So a couple of fish have these giant paper clips so that their magnets can attach to them. There he is with some eyeballs. And then a couple of them have a loop of paracord with some nuts screwed onto them. And I really did screw them on, because see, when I was trying to get it to go over the end of it, it wasn't going to slide over that paracord. I did pull the middle part of it out because I was trying to make the that nut go on there. Well, see, I did twist it on there. I cut it diagonally and twisted that nut and screwed it onto there. So there's a knot on each side of these that will end up on the inside of the fish, just to help keep it from being able to be pulled out so easy. Look at that fish. Isn't that fun? He's got a different shape from some of the others, but the same thing, that instead of making it stick out, which is where I want it to be when it's done, the loop of this has to go toward the inside. Now here, if you wanted to, you could pre-sew it to one side of the fish instead of trying to pin it to stay between the two of them, but this, at least you can sew straight over. I didn't have to go slow and be careful to get across this paracord. Just sew right across it. The machine's plenty tough to be able to sew across that paracord. So, but here I did just sew the face of the fish, the head of the fish. I don't know. I did just sew a little bit of the front of the fish so that I could get those safety eyes in and have plenty of room to work and get the eyes into this fun red sort of whale looking fish. These are like jewelry pieces. This has a nut sewn onto it. I don't know. I tried a couple of different things. Oh, but then I crocheted some fish because I was traveling and I couldn't take my sewing machine with me. Thanks for watching. I hope that'll help you make your dozen or so fish for somebody special in your lives. I love the story about when Jesus went out and told the disciples to follow me and I will make you fishers of men, and they got up immediately and got into the boat. This is our beginning of that. Learn how to fish so you can begin to understand what it means to be fishers of men. See you next time.